How to Make Our Mental Pictures Come True, a series of easy lessons in the art of visualizing by George Schuebel, copyright 1922. Part 1, The Mechanics of Visualizing. How to Make Our Mental Pictures Come True. Chapter 3, How Our Mental Pictures First Take Form. The photographer studying physical science finds that this universal light is not only the primary basis of universal substance, but the forming, specializing, differentiating, and projecting power as well. He finds that this universal light forever is acting in, upon, and through the universal undifferentiated substance, which it itself is, so that it is forever in a state of spontaneous formulation, taking shape and character out of its ambient being according to the initial impulse given to its movement. In the most elemental physical sense, then, we find an all-pervading infinite ocean of pure primary light, of an inconceivable rarity, continuously acting upon and within itself in the nature of a movement which we know as vibration, and which physical science first observes in the pure waves of light, which are termed ether. And from this point, it is more readily comprehended in its forever separative and outwardly appearing process, until the point where the photographer finds a universe and a world of outwardly visible objects toward which he can level his photographic camera for purposes of reproduction. In this manner in which light takes on form, in the physical sense in which we recognize all outwardly visible objects, including the immense universe and our more specialized selves, forever changing from the universal to the particular, from the unformed to the formed, from the undifferentiated to the differentiated, from the unspecialized to the specialized. All visible objects are primarily of the substance of light, assuming shape and density according to the momentum of the outpush or initial movement coming from the invisible sense world to the visible sense world, so that trees, persons, hills, stars, landscapes, and all else visible are but the differentiated effects of the one primary light, impulsing upon its own impalpable substance and formulating itself into literal objects of light, but so compactly that these objects become separately visible to us in contrast to the more general light out of which they have been formed. Now then, in laying the basis for our visualizing studies, we go beyond these remotest points of physical science and of the senses, and apply the same observation in regard to light to the formation of our own selves. We say that the forming, specializing, differentiating, and objectifying power, energy, or life, call it what we will, is this same light operating in an infinitely rarer, invisible, and inner manner, forever acting upon, in and through its own uniform, unspecialized, undifferentiated, universal conscience substance, so that it formulates, particularizes, specializes, differentiates, and objectifies itself into individualized forms which we recognize as our individual objective selves or minds, shaping itself out of the universal objective sense consciousness and becoming the individual objective sense consciousness, becoming in fact our very inner selves, objects of light. And in turn, we can say that within ourselves, this same continuous separative process of the light goes on, so that out of our inner illumined selves are formed our objects of thought, objects of light, which we qualify by the term bright thoughts, and by other terms descriptive of the substance of light out of which they are formed. We become conscious of the initial movement or outpush of the mind light substance shaping itself through us in its most primary sense as motion, commotion, or as we are accustomed to call it, emotion. When the impulse is forceful enough to motivate and sustain itself, a differentiation takes place in the form of what we call desire. If our desire is sufficiently strong and vitalized, a further differentiation of the mind light takes place spontaneously or in visualizing deliberately in the form of our objective thinking, establishing itself in the objective state of our consciousness as an object of light, an enlightened idea, or thought object which, as we shall observe later, we are able to see within us by reflection, and which, by further specialization, becomes reproduced outwardly as a thing. The process which results in this latter phenomenon is explained by the fact that the substance of light within the mind forms itself outwardly by acting upon the substance of light outside of the mind, and this is the manner in which it is assumed that our thought objects reproduce themselves in outward visible form in the things which we desire. This formulation of light substance of mind in us and through us is going on constantly and spontaneously. It is a characteristic of our being. We cannot be without desires, and we cannot experience a desire which does not seek to formulate itself into some sort of objective thinking. Our objective thinking formulates itself into an objective thought, and we cannot know an objective thought which does not move to differentiate itself from the inner invisible to the form of the outward visible thing toward which our desire primarily is directed. Our thought takes outward shape always, and for this reason it is scientifically correct to say that thoughts are things, fashioned out of the only true substance of light, out of which all things whatsoever visible or invisible are formed. In deliberative visualization for certain things of our heart's desire, we do not seek to change the natural, spontaneous movement of the invisible, universal, formulating, differentiating, and specializing characteristic of light, life or energy acting upon and in and through us, but rather to fulfill it. To its activity we bring directivity. To its spontaneity we bring regulation and control. And in this manner we bring to ourselves all already existing things which relate themselves to our inmost desires, together with their circumstances and conditions in an orderly and logical manner and in natural sequence. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Mind's Photographic Studio. It is quite natural to understand that it would be of little value for the photographer to see and comprehend his object if he had not some sort of mechanical equipment with which to project, focus, and reproduce what he sees. So too, it would be of little avail for us to be able to formulate our mental objects and to comprehend them if we did not have some sort of mental mechanism by means of which we could reproduce outwardly the thought images held within the mind. For photographic purposes, the photographer has a well-equipped studio provided with settings, camera, and all the other essentials and materials. A similar inner equipment of the mind is found in what we call our objective state of consciousness, serving us as an elaborate mental photographic studio provided with all the mental mechanical essentials and materials needed to image forth and reproduce our desires, our objects of thought. End of Chapter 4 of How to Make Our Mental Images Come True by George Schuebel. Narrated by Rex King.